in your opinion, do you think there's a single event or a milestone that happens as you grow up as a Mormon that once you pass that, leaving the church is a lot harder for a person to do?
That depends on if you are born in the covenant or if you're a convert.
Yeah.
Right. So people who are born in the covenant, I think baptism is that event.
Okay.
But of course, it's a matter of like, that's where you plant your stake, or that's where you dig the first shovelfuls of your trench.
Yeah.
And every milestone after that, you're shoveling out more fulls of your trench that you're digging yourself into. And each of those milestones of, the 2-year interviews, you getting the priesthood at the age of 12. That's another one that's really hard to walk back on. Ordained a priest at 16, where you can bless the sacrament. That's a big one as well, because suddenly you're not passing the sacrament, you are blessing the sacrament.
Right.
The members of your ward are hearing your voice speak a magic spell over their mid-church snack every Sunday. And that's when it becomes even harder to turn back culturally. Yeah. The mission is huge. That's the mission. Like, if everything before that is, digging out with a shovel, the mission just brings a fucking backhoe in and front loads a ton of the dirt out of this trench. So there are incremental milestones that you go through, but I think as soon as you're baptized, then that's when culturally it becomes a lot harder to do anything. And you get that at 8 years old, long before you can say, oh, do I believe in something? No, you spend your entire life up at the pulpit, every other fast Sunday with your parents whispering in your ears, I know the church is true. And then you say it to the pulpit, over a crowd of 300 people that are all your neighbors. Yeah. And I love my mom and dad. I know this church is true. And Joseph Smith was a prophet, and we follow a prophet today. You say all of these things and they become true with repetition, and every single testimony that you give makes it harder to back out. And, they pound all of these concepts and philosophies into you from such an early age, long before any human develops the mental mechanisms to combat the indoctrination. And I don't think there's a single catalyzing event, but it's all just incremental indoctrination.
I do for men. I do think there's a single event, and I want to give you my theory on it. If it's on purpose, it is a genius and terrible conspiracy. But I think it is actually so for non-Mormons watching, non-ex-Mormons, at 14, you become what's called a teacher. You don't teach shit, but at that point, you are now allowed to prepare the sacrament. So basically beforehand, you're putting the bread down but there's this reverence of you're preparing the body of Christ, basically. But also at 14, you're also masturbating a lot. Right. But you hate yourself for it. Right. So at 14, as you're doing this and you're feeling all of this shame, you're actually heading toward the embracing of that shame rather than going, does this actually, like, am I really hurting anybody? It's that weekly you are handling bread with the same hands that probably only an hour ago you were whacking off with. And I
think of us, it wasn't like in the actual preparation closet.
Yeah.
You like get all the fill up the water cups. Yeah. It's like at the same time.
My reasoning here is that at 14, that is when all of the guilt stuff starts to hit you really hard. Yeah. And if you get there and you make it past it, you're still doing all of those things, but you've committed to this. And that's where the shame and the depression comes in, and why that is such depression and suicide on the, not just for the gay kids, but for some of the straight ones too, is still a problem as well. I think it is that reconciling with that terrible amount of guilt, that if you make it past that, you're in now. Like you're pretty solid in, because I think that's where and if they did that on purpose, like, let's give the priesthood to the young ones because we can use their terrible shame and guilt to make them commit for life, make them self-indoctrinate. That'd be brilliant, but that's too brilliant a conspiracy for me to think is likely.
Self-indoctrinate instead of self-abuse. Yeah. Well, I think what you're talking about is a trend that so many religions do, and I don't think that it is conscious so much as it is just so deeply baked into religious culture. Particularly, we're talking about this from the Protestant foundations of America, and that is a religion's ability to control a person's sexuality, right? Because those are emotions that we don't always have words for. Right. And because we evolved language long after we ever evolved the feelings to have that, we need the language in order to describe those feelings. And there's still a lot of emotions that us humans have that our little mouth words cannot articulate.
Right.
And when an organization can co-opt those and leverage those emotions for its own gain, for its own indoctrination, for its tithing, for, bringing in more new members, whatever the case may be. And, you and I are only able to speak to this from the male perspective, but obviously it happens a lot with women as well, just from a different perspective of controlling their virtue, controlling their purity, and commodifying their sexuality of, this is your greatest possession. Don't you dare fucking lose this.
Yep.
It's a matter of just controlling our most basic instincts, that we can point to it and say it's a conspiracy, and we can say it's deliberate, but it's something that's so deeply ingrained in almost every religious culture worldwide that it's not up to like a single group of men that are like, oh, if we get them to feel shame about their masturbation, they're going to be lifelong members. It's not that. It's so subconscious. It's so as a foundational construct of the culture that, there's no single person bears any brunt of the blame. It's not even a single institution. It's just a product of the culture. And but I mean, that's just pointing out how things are. We can also point out to how things ought to be. And I'm, much of the opinion that we're in deep, dire need of a sexual revolution.
Absolutely.
And people stopping policing each other's sexuality, and people believing somebody when they claim that something bad happened to them. We need to have a completely morphed and different understanding, an evolution of understanding about our sexuality. And I don't know how else to say this, but mature. Society needs to mature about our sexuality and stop being the way that we are. And unfortunately, we can say all society is fucked because we treat our sexuality so weird. Well, there are different cultures that treat their sexuality different than we do ours. Yeah. There's nothing saying that one system is optimal over another system, unless we tease apart exactly what mechanisms play out and what cultural what cultural manifestations are made, represented by what are the cultural impacts of controlling people's sexuality. Like that's all just let's just be more open about this. Let's not I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts about it that are not very well refined.
Yeah. I think when I say conscious too, if there was any conscious choice to it, I think it's more of like the leaning into it when you see it successful, and like that it is now we can, like, we've approved 14-year-olds to do this, and then we realized and leaned into that it's a really good tool to shame them with. Like, you're preparing the body of Christ while you do that? Are you shitting me?
Yeah. Well, and also like ascribing malice to it, I don't think is fair either. It's a matter of every single person who does this, subconscious leaning in, at the personal level. I self-abused last night. I am so ashamed of myself. Every person that leans into it on a personal level, that is controlling their own sexuality based on the cultural dictates of the religion and of the society. And we have to understand that the people who are perpetuating those systems feel that same shame and guilt. Yeah. You can't truly try and make a case that every single member of the Apostles in the Quorum of the 70s has never fucking masturbated. Yeah. You can't do that.
Shit.
Like, really, I mean, it's just insane. And to say that they are maliciously controlling people's sexuality, I think ignores the culture that they grew up in. They grew up in the Nelson was born in like 1926 or whatever, right? His grandparents were born in the 1860s in Utah when it was a territory and polygamy was being openly practiced, right? During prior to the Civil War. His grandparents were born before the Civil War.
And then people wonder why they're always late to like civil rights games. Like
Right. It's like they're just as much a product of the culture. They don't have a pipeline to any level of inspiration that is, enlightened above and beyond any of us anybody else. We're all humans. We're all navigating the world around us, and we are all subject to the morals and the philosophies of the culture from which we grow. That's as simple as that.
As malice comes, like, to me, it's whatever, and maybe it's just the term, but like, you see it in corporate abuse all the time, the way like they see what is good for the bottom line and bottom dollar, and that makes its way into the culture of the business, of the corporation. Absolutely. Where nobody's going like, hey, they're auditing and like, have we tried yelling at them for having impure thoughts? But it's helpful. It's helpful to the overall bottom line because it does build in. But anyway,
and to be clear though, and let me just articulate this a little bit further too, because there is some level of malice that plays into it, right? So the Mormon Reformation period, and also the retrenchment era of Mormonism were very much about controlling people's sexuality and creating a system of community police forces. So that's when home teaching and visiting teaching comes into play in Utah, and when cleansing of any apostates, where a lot of people go missing in Utah. The Mormon Reformation period is when a lot of these controlling mechanisms were put into place in bishops' interviews in order to, regulated intervals, bishops' interviews come into play. I mean, all of these things really harken back to that Reformation and the retrenchment periods in Utah. And there's a lot of malice that played into that. There was a lot of Brigham Young's iron-fisted, control that caused that to happen.
Right. Yeah. And